I think the biggest challenge in leadership, in education, I think, is balancing the needs of children with the legal requirements of a collective agreement. Collective agreements are put in place rightly between the two parties, the teachers union or any other union within education, and the employer, the school board. And every now and then, something happens in a classroom where a mistake is made by, or it's not a mistake, it could be malicious, but usually it's a mistake by a staff member. And now, as a leader, take time to investigate what's going on. And you can find yourself in a bind between the legal requirements that are owed to the teacher, rightly, and the legal and moral requirements owed to the student, and rightly. So there is this tension that exists. Those tensions, when those situations happen, that is when people lose sleep because you don't want to be harm to a student. These are the more vulnerable ones, often kids who are marginalized. Those are the ones that are the most troubling and challenging. And there's no question that leaders will rely on their counselors, their advisors, their assistant superintendents, their HR people. But at the end of the day, it's the chief executive officer who's making that decision that the welfare of that student depends on and a due fair process for the teacher. And those are, as I said, those are the most challenging parts of the work. There's no question.
As someone who is nearing, or maybe I'm already there, the age of retirement, I find it refreshing to talk to those who are just outside of the active duty, if you will, to be able to be candid and a little less politically bound by their statements. And so today's conversation is with Ted Franson, a newly retired superintendent, CEO, formerly of Pembina Trails in Manitoba. And I connected with Ted a number of years ago, and while he was still in Pembina Trails, and he continues to work for the province as in charge of remote learning. But it was just refreshing to hear him talk about some of the challenges that he faced, as you just heard in that clip, as a leader. And we talked about the thick skin that's required for leadership. And that was a really important conversation for me to unpack, because so often the guests that I have on this show and the people that I know in leadership are very positive people, and they do look on optimistically and hopefully at education and all it can do, and rightly so. That's the disposition you need to have. But there's no question they face a lot of bullets, a lot of things coming their way that aren't, that can really bother a person, personal attacks and things like that. We've seen more of that increase. So I really was intrigued by this aspect of the conversation that Ted and I had. And I think you'll understand and appreciate his perspective. He adds a lot to that. And also, just fun fact, Ted lives in my hometown, the town I grew up in. And so I don't get there as often as I used to, but I get updates from him as to what's happening in the small but beautiful town of Morden, Manitoba, Canada. So great conversation. Thank you, Ted, for your time, and enjoy this chat with Ted Franson. So Ted, first off, what's retirement like?
Retirement is phenomenal. Highly recommend it when it's time to pursue it. I've enjoyed spending more time with my grandkids, with my kids, and with family and friends. So it's been a breath of fresh air. And most importantly, I have free evenings.
Yes, in your role as superintendent, I think that's the premium side of it, the work being the work, but it's just that the days can get so long. So what was it? Was there anything, when you think about your decision to retire, there's two sides to this. One is, okay, so I'm eligible to retire, but things are going well, so I'm going to hang in there. And then when I wake up one morning and it's just not fun anymore, whatever, then I retire. Or there's the other line of thinking that is, hey, if things are going well, this is the time to leave because I'm leaving everything in a good place. What entered into the decision for you?
I think it's the latter. I had a 40-year career. I started teaching in 1982. And as 2022 approached, it, it occurred to me over during COVID that I wasn't going to leave during COVID because, as you say, I wasn't going to leave during a rough time. And things were going really well as I was approaching 2022, which was my 40th year. And it just felt right. It just felt right that the school division was in a really good place. There were strong people leading, and I knew that I could leave at a time when the school board would have little difficulty in finding a great replacement, which they did in Lisa Bowles. And I know Lisa has been on this podcast with you, and you know for yourself that she was a strong leader to replace me.
So now but of course you don't just go cold turkey. You decide, or you were arm wrestled. I'm not sure how it came about to continue utilizing your wisdom and your experience working at the ministry level. So tell us a little bit about your current role and what you're enjoying about it.
You're right. When you're a superintendent or a director of education, it's a 24/7 job, constantly on. And anyone who knows me was not surprised to learn that I wasn't going to go quietly into the good night, that I still had some ideas and some energy, but I wanted it to be a little differently displayed. And so my current role with Manitoba Education and Early Childhood Learning is working on the online high school and the remote learning strategy. So when I started this in September of 2022, the government of the day desired to launch a provincial online high school as a follow-up to the work that was being done locally by some school divisions who were already providing online high school credits. So that's what I'm doing now on a part-time basis.
So given you have more work time, and I know you're out bike riding and doing all those kind of things, in those moments as you maybe take time to reflect on 40 years in education, if we're gonna put a highlight reel together for you, what I'm gonna give you 3 experiences or moments that you think would make that final cut. So you gotta do a little editing because there's
Yeah.
lots, but we're gonna keep this a 3-minute clip, if you will. I don't know how many, but 3 moments that would
Okay.
make final cut.
The first moment is in and of itself a collage. It's the moments of awe and wonder in the eyes of students, my students when I was a chemistry teacher, and when they were engaged in lab work and they saw some of the things that they had heard about as a theoretical basis in the lecture portion of chemistry, if you will, or the solving portion, and to see it come alive in a lab, practical application of the theory and the awe and wonder in their eyes, in their faces. You can't replace that. That's the gift of being a teacher, that students do that year after year, day after day. A second image is in Investors Group Field in Winnipeg, when we brought together 50,000 students for the human rights of a child that the United Nations had done, to celebrate that, to talk about it as a school division, as a family of 35 schools, 15,000 kids. And every one of the people there had done an 8 by 10 art project. They had picked a human right, the one that meant the most to them. And we had laid it out on the floor of the field, the football field where the Bombers play, in the sign of a dove, symbol of a dove, a peace dove. And it was a remarkable experience. And that evening, as parents walked down, almost like ants coming down the stairs, if you will, of the stadium from the floor to the field, it warmed my heart to be there as superintendent, to be a part of that. And then again, back to Investors Group Field, the third image is celebrating Canada's 150. We had a band of 1,500 band players. I'm probably exaggerating, but it was a huge number playing "O Canada," and 15,000 kids and 2,000 staff singing "O Canada" for Canada 150. And I was standing next to Negan Sinclair. You might know of him from U of M, and right next to him. And he made a comment that I'll never forget. He looked over at me after it was done, And he said, I've had my concerns about Canada, but I got nothing on this. It was an emotional rendition of our national anthem. And I suspect that our students will remember those two
Yeah.
occasions for the rest of their life. And so to be able to have been a part of that was gratifying.
Those are great. And even your first share of sort of those moments in awe and wonder, I'd like to believe that our students will remember those moments as well, right? Because, and again, that's to me the payoff every day. You don't get that every single day, but you work towards that. I talk about a lot about that in my work around joy, is that like those moments of like when the bell rings and they're still there, they've forgotten about everything else, but they're just fully engaged and fully there to experience the world, something for the first time. And I know you and I both, as grandparents, get to experience that with our little ones often too. And it's just a reminder of, yeah, that's what this work is about. And that's what our lives are about, is getting those moments. So
So
that's
one more
awesome.
story. I know you gave
Okay,
me
you can get a fourth one. We got time for a fourth.
fourth story. So many years after this brilliant student of mine, Chad, graduated from grade 12, I happened to run into him on campus at the University of Waterloo. I was there with my kid who was a student there. Just coincidentally ran into Chad. We embraced, had a good chat. And he said, Mr. Franson, one of the things I'll never forget about your chemistry classes, no matter how many times we tried to get you off track with another story, because I'm a storyteller, every single time you always brought that story back to a lesson in chemistry. Somehow, every single thing on earth related to chemistry. And now, again, we transmit culture and tradition through story.
Yeah.
We transmit chemistry and biology and American and Canadian history through story. And so to have a student give me that affirmation many years later on campus at Waterloo
Yeah.
was pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's another experience of educators. There's so many kids that come across through our classrooms that we interact with, and as a society and the culture and young kids especially, they saying thank you and something and being grateful in those kind of overt ways is not something that happens as often as it should. And
Oh,
I think we can all take the blame for that. We're all probably lacking a little bit in expressing gratitude. But when it happens, it is just, and it's one of those things where too, like if you get it from one, you can then extrapolate that, oh, I bet you there are many others who may have wanted to express the same sentiments, but it's always great. It's always great to hear from people. And I'm even now in my work, whenever somebody reminds me of something I did or said or helped them with, however many years ago, we need that. We need to
yeah,
be doing
absolutely.
that. So we all need to do better at thanking people for the impact, because there's so many people that's the great part of it. And that's the thing too in education, the quality of people. And I'm biased, right? And I haven't worked in law or haven't worked in the business world to the same degree, right? But feels educators are special people because as I've said before, it's actually hard to be a bad teacher. You can be. I'm not
Yeah,
saying there aren't there. It's hard though, right? Because you don't last in this
true.
profession if you're bad at it.
Yeah.
Like that. In fact, if you can get through 30 years of being a bad teacher, wow. I don't want to say kudos to you, but that's actually quite an
It's
accomplishment
true.
because
Yeah.
a lot
It,
to get through. And again, you and I have both so many people that we want to thank, but always as part of this, your experience over the years, leadership isn't easy, whether it's the evening meetings or all. There's just, you could list hundreds and hundreds. But when you think back to your career, I always like people to think about a leadership challenge that really tested them, made them have to pause, and maybe there were some mistakes made through that, but certainly a learning that happened. So do you have a story about a leadership challenge that you faced in your 40-year career?
I think the biggest challenge in leadership, in education, I think, is balancing the needs of children with the legal requirements of a collective agreement. Collective agreements are put in place rightly between the two parties, the teachers union or any other union within education, and the employer, the school board. And every now and then, something happens in a classroom where a mistake is made by, or it's not a mistake, it could be malicious, but usually it's a mistake by a staff member. And now, as a leader, take time to investigate what's going on. And you find yourself you can find yourself in a bind between the legal requirements that are owed to the teacher rightly, and the legal and moral requirements owed to the student, and rightly. So there is this tension that exists. And it is that those tensions, when those situations happen, that is when people lose sleep, because you don't want to be harm to a student. These are the more vulnerable ones, often kids who are marginalized. And so that's an example. I won't give you a specific
Sure.
detail story, of course, but I say those are the ones that are the most troubling and challenging. And there's no question that leaders will rely on their counselors, their advisors, their assistant superintendents, their HR people. But at the end of the day, it's the chief executive officer who's making that decision, that the welfare of that student depends on, and a due fair process for the teacher. And those are, as I said, those are the most challenging parts of the work. There's no question.
And sometimes in those cases, there's no winners. It's just hard because you're just in a bad spot. All outcomes are not great. So you're trying to choose the least
Yes.
bad outcome. And to that end, the one thing I wonder about, Ted, is I see so many people like you, and I'm in awe of kind of the authentic, caring nature that you have. And yet at the same time, like I feel, and maybe you've seen this change over time, like the degree to which you have to have a thick skin, because
Mm,
things are said about you, things are said about your school division. There's just a million things coming your way that if you were to intake everything and take everything personally or so forth. When I was teaching, I started off teaching grade one, and I was a young teacher and not all that smart sometimes, but like when kids would say mean things to me,
yeah.
I would take it personally. And
Yeah.
no, this is not, and it just took me a while to wrap my head around that. But I think your situation is even more elevated because you're not talking necessarily about 7-year-olds and 6-year-olds making fun of you,
Uh,
but you're talking about adults who
Yeah.
maybe. So I wonder about that. What kind of thick skin do you have to do your job?
Whoa. Boy, Dean, you're onto something there. I grew up in a family of six siblings. There's six of us. So my thick skin was developed early. But I don't, I know that my skin got thicker as I got more experience. But there's no question that surrounding yourself with good people and building trusting relationships with the people with whom you're working, and having a home situation where you get the kind of support and encouragement that I've gotten. I've been fortunate to have a super supportive family, and my wife, Esther, has been nothing short of spectacular when it comes to being supportive. And so the skin got thicker as I had more and more experience in admin. And I would say also that we shouldn't rush people into leadership positions. We do need to give people time to develop that skin, that ability to process attacks, if you will, as being less about you and more about the person that's attacking you. And
Right.
that helps you depersonalize it. There's that wonderful Ted Lasso episode. It's probably the number one YouTube watch Ted Lasso episode where he's doing the darts. He makes that comment that the people that were harassing him in his youth, it was not about him, it was about them. And a lesson that his dad taught him, be curious, not judgmental. And I learned over and over again that it's not personal. It's not about me because I had the voice of wisdom around me. I was surrounded by really top notch leaders. I learned from some incredible people who modeled calm, reasonable, and rational approach to conflict.
This episode is brought to you by Advanced Learning Partnerships, also known as ALP. We are a professional learning consulting group that serves communities across North America. We are partners, designers, and agents for change. And you can learn more about the work we do at alplearn.com. The other thing that I've written about it a few times on my blog, and I had a post recently on LinkedIn, just asking leaders who's got your back, right? Because you're there to serve other people. That's what you're there to do. And if you're doing it right, people see you in that light. They say, Ted's got my back. I know he's supporting me. But you relish being able to do that. But you need people who have your back too and encourage you. And
Yes.
and so this isn't a hierarchy where You support the principals, support the teachers, support the students. Yes, that's how it flows. But also, how do we teach the principals to support you and the
Hmm.
teachers to support their principals and ultimately the students to support their teachers, right? Again, it's always weighted heavily on the side of those that have a little bit more power and authority, for sure. But a good community sees it reciprocity in this alignment. And I think about myself, I think about specifically about us as taxpayers and citizens and the vitriol that is thrown to politicians, no matter who they are. And I have a number of friends who are both MPs and MLAs, some in your province and
Hmm.
elsewhere. And sometimes I just watch what people say online to them and I think, who is going to want this job?
I know. I
And
agree.
and as this trickles into education, and we're already seeing some challenges with leadership. Hard to find good people.
Hmm.
Not as many teachers are raising their hand to say, I want to take a leadership role.
It's true.
And that worries me. That worries me. So, in the light of that, and you touched on it already about young leaders, I want to ask you about growing leadership and what that looks like. So, if you're talking to that teacher who's in their third or fourth year of teaching, who are maybe has some leadership tendencies or interests, what would you say to them in terms of how can they prepare themselves to be a really good leader? What should they be thinking about or doing now?
They should certainly be thinking about getting grounded in some good literature, doing some really solid reading of some really solid leadership literature and taking it seriously. Peter Drucker's work on leadership and management, and Simon Sinek's about purpose. Why? Answer the question, why do you want to be a leader? What's motivating you to become a leader? That would be some of the advice I give, and making sure that you build relationships in your immediate world so you get some honest feedback. I know that in every station along the way of my career, I purposely set the stage for people to give me honest feedback about ideas. If just because I put an idea out doesn't mean it's going to be a good one. Right. So just go at it. Let's go at this. Here's one idea we can float with the board for balancing our budget. And it might be a lousy idea, but coming out of that discussion would be a better idea. It's not about my idea, it's about what's going to work. And to do that, you need to build relationships. You need to assure your colleagues that risk is welcome. I, I like the expression failing forward. It's okay to fail. It's okay to make a mistake and get up and try it again and do something different, learn from the mistake. And if we don't have a culture of safety to make mistakes, you're not going to get the best answers. You're not going to get the best solutions. You need a culture of safety.
And young teachers can certainly build that in their classrooms right now, right? That's part of it. How do you create you will be part of designing a culture that adheres and celebrates that approach. Again, I'd like you to add a fifth aspect to your highlight reel. And this one is to call out. And we begin in broad terms about networks and people who've supported us along the way. But I want you to name a person. This time you have to get specific. And again, I know you could pick up hundreds and hundreds of people, but who's one person that you really want to give a bit of a shout out to? And I'll caveat with this, I would like this to be somebody that is alive and might listen to this podcast so that they could hear their name. Because I just think that's such a cool thing when people hear themselves mentioned in these kind of public spaces. So who are you grateful for in education?
Oh boy, this you're putting me on the spot, and
I
because
know.
you've
It's
nailed
fine.
it. There are so many. I honestly stand on the shoulders of so many giants of people who came before me and taught me so much. I am going to narrow it down to somebody who's alive, somebody who impacted me as he was retiring from a position of significant leadership in Manitoba over 20 years ago, but continued to keep in touch with me, and was somebody I would consider him to be almost like my elder, if you will. And his name is Srini Reddy. Srini Reddy grew up in South Africa and came to Canada as a fairly young man, married with kids, I believe, and found his way up to the PAW. Manitoba, where he eventually became a principal, and then he became a superintendent in Frontier School Division, which is Manitoba, one of Canada's largest geographic school divisions. And then he became the executive director of Manitoba Association of School Superintendents. And when he retired from there, he took on a volunteer spirit of making sure that school systems never forgot kids. So here's why he meant so much to me. As he was retiring from being executive director of Manitoba Association of School Superintendents, he made a commitment, a promise to the members of Mass that he was going to come back and haunt us and continually ask, how are the kids doing? Who's looking after the kids? And if superintendents and directors of education across Canada aren't doing that, then we're failing at our job. And he didn't just make that up. He has repeatedly reinserted himself in my life throughout my career from that moment on. I consider him to be a friend. We have lunch occasionally. He invites me to his house to his condo for tea. And he taught me the soft side of leadership. I'm German heritage. There's no soft side to leadership in German heritage. And what Streety did was he pulled me from the abyss of simply being about columns and rows and about rules and policies and reminded me regularly of what it means to be a leader, to care fundamentally about students. And what he's done in Pembina Trails and across Winnipeg, I think, I'll focus on Pembina Trails. He would come every year and ask, what school can you send me to so I can start collecting coats for Northern Manitoba, for First Nations. And so every fall, he would send truckloads of used coats, gently used winter coats up north, books, anything that we didn't need anymore would still be useful that we thought we didn't need, quote unquote. Yeah. Still had use. And he's a remarkable spiritual leader about what's truly important in education. So Srini Reddy is my shout out. There are many, many others, but he's the one that I came down to.
You're just confirming my previous statement about the quality of people in education and kind of how they are, and that's tremendous and great to have somebody like that. When you mentioned there's a German, you don't have a soft side. I recently saw an interview with Leon Draisaitl from the Oilers, who's
Oh,
German.
yeah. Yeah.
And if you've ever watched his interviews, he just comes in and he has his toque on and he doesn't smile and he just answers these very abrupt questions. And finally, a reporter said to him, Leon, why are you so pissy all the time? And he says,
Oh,
I'm German. I'm not pissy. I'm German. Good answer. Good answer. But hey, self-awareness. That's another one of those things you got to have if you want to be a
yes.
good leader. You got to be self-aware and know where to lead. Listen, so let's transition out as we wrap our time up today. So I don't know if your reading habits change when you retire, but what are you reading these days?
Oh my goodness. I'm reading 2 books and I've just finished one and I'm almost finished the other one. The leadership book is called Ike, the Dog Who Saved a Human. Powerful leadership story by Jason Dorland, who was a Canadian Olympian in rowing in Seoul and has gone on to a career of teaching in Victoria, as well as leadership development and executive coaching. It's about a golden retriever who changes this guy. Talk about it. It's a fabulous leadership book, and dogs are near and dear to me. So it's a perfect marriage of that. And I'm also reading Clive Cussler's Dirk Pitt adventure called Cyclops. So
Sci-fi?
no, Clive Cussler, Dirk Pitt, come on.
No,
You
I
got to get
know.
out more, my friend.
I guess I do. Yeah, but see, this is the thing though. You're retired now, so I don't know, you probably read before, but like that's where I get called out a lot in my family because I don't read enough fiction. So
So
I have
I
to.
never used to read any fiction. Then when I had my cancer surgery on my tongue, I couldn't speak for a while. My kids gave me fiction books and my wife gave me fiction books to read. And ever since then, I've been reading fiction, but of course I continue to read leadership books too.
Good for you. Good for you. What about in the streaming viewing? You already mentioned Ted Lasso. What else catches your attention streaming
Oh,
wise?
yeah. Oh, I love the Jack Ryan series on Prime. So it's been something that we've been watching. I like watching the FBI crime mysteries. So that's the kind of stuff that I
Yep.
like
Yep.
to watch.
Yeah, they're in the and so my last question is this now I'm really excited about this question because we didn't say so on at any point, but you live in my hometown of Morden, Manitoba, which I am very proud to have come from. It is for anybody who doesn't know it, it is just one of the best little places in the world. And that part, this is what I tell people, and maybe you mentioned when we were talking before about your kids living in Ayers, Ontario, but I feel like the Morden Winkler area, 60 or so miles south of Winnipeg, is one of the rare places in all of Canada that they're not really a bedroom community, but have over the years maintained and thrived as small towns. That is
Correct.
very unusual. And in
Yes.
fact, I don't know of any other place in all of Canada that has had the trajectory that southern Manitoba, Pembina Valley has had. So that's that. It's a beautiful little town. You've chosen to put roots there. So there's lots of cool things to do in Morden, but what do you like to tell people about come to Morden and check it out?
Dean, and I love cycling and I love the outdoors. Morden has, I would say, Manitoba's finest off-road mountain bike path around Lake
Yeah, I didn't
Minnewaska.
know this. I didn't
It's
know this.
it's fantastic. It's highly technical. It's a 6 kilometer ride around the lake, and so if you do it twice, you got 12 kilometers. But in those 12 kilometers, you got 200 meters of elevation gain with the up and down on the path. So it's phenomenal. I shouldn't use that word so often. It's just a remarkable place to get fitness, to have fun, to be outdoors. So that's the outdoor part. It's Morden and Winkler together. Sure, probably a radius of about 50,000. Also, again, just vibrant business and arts and economic relationships. It's a great place to be.
Any favorite restaurants or places to check? What are your coffee shop? I don't even know. What do you find? Because I actually don't know anymore the answer to that
Yeah.
question.
I don't spend a lot of time in restaurants. I would say that I actually don't know. I'm sure that there's some, I don't go to restaurants.
I know where my dad goes, which isn't that all that exciting. So I was gonna
Did you go to Chicken
he's at the
Delight?
no, probably the Motor Inn is kinda
Oh,
where he
yeah.
goes.
Motor
That's
Inn.
where the cronies all
Yeah.
meet, so that's been there for years, but I know even the museums are is gets quite a bit. I love the little still standing bit they did
Yes.
on Morden. That was well
Yes.
done and
Yes.
spoke very highly, I think, of the community's efforts in diversity. That wasn't listen, my world growing up in Morden was very white. I had
Oh,
a
yeah.
couple of kids of color, maybe 1 or 2, but that's changed everywhere in Canada. But a little town like Morden and Winkler may have been more difficult for that to grow, but it seems like people are really embracing a lot of new people in the town.
I moved to Morden in the year 2000, so 24 years ago. And then only 5 years later, I became superintendent in Winnipeg. And 19 years ago, I basically spent most of my life in Winnipeg, even though I lived in Morden. My grandkids are half of them are in Morden, half of them are in Ontario. But in those 19 years when I was fundamentally working in Winnipeg, Morden has morphed and evolved into something as you just described. So when I got there in 2000, it was lily white. Now I walk down the street on the main street of Stephen Street, and the diversity is beautiful.
Yeah.
It's enriching. The world has come to Morden,
Nice.
and it's a beautiful thing.
And again, the story that the woman told about the mayor sending somebody to the airport to pick her up. She says, I'm a nobody, and the mayor is picking me up and courted me around. And she was just coming from India to try to figure out where she might want to live. So I thought that was a very touching story. But Ted, this was a good conversation. I respect all that you've done and are continuing to do, and I wish you the best. And next time in Morden, I'll call you up and we'll have a coffee.
Please do. And we'll go to Coffee Culture. That is the place that I'll go to.
Okay, coffee culture it is. Thanks, Ted.
Take care.